Welcome back. It's great to see you again after you have just completed your midterm exam. And not only that, but you're actually in a way more than halfway through the course material because you have now completed the assigned works for two of our three playwrights, Aeschylus and Sophocles. So we're making really good progress. I hope that you got your midterm in on time and that it went well. And now we'll be able to complete the cycle of ancient Greek myth and tragedy by examining the playwright of Euripides and his plays. And if Sophocles was already a somewhat more enjoyable playwright to read than Aeschylus, I think you'll find that Euripides is really a lot of fun to read. He's even more accessible, and he has a very sardonic view on human nature. You'll see in all of the plays we read that really gives us a kind of wake-up call that sometimes the most tragic events that happen in human experience really should not necessarily be taken all as hard as one might expect when one reads these plays. So let's go to our playwright Euripides. Please pause the video and go to Sakai. Please download the third and final of the handouts provided in resources on Sakai. That will give you some basic information on our third playwright, Euripides. Please pause your video and go and locate that handout. Okay, do you have the handout open? Superb. Let us discuss Euripides. I want to first preface Euripides himself by mentioning that the videos you have been listening to have described Greek history and especially Athenian history up to the year 431 BC, which is the onset of the Peloponnesian War, the major conflict between Athens and Sparta. So the remaining lectures describing the history will be focused specifically on that war. The plays we have surviving from Euripides date in the years either preceding the war or actually occurring in the war itself. So you should realize that both Sophocles and Euripides have plays that date from this crucial and unfortunately itself tragic period in Athenian history. I think quite a bit of what Euripides puts in the plays reflects on Athenian society specifically, as well as human nature in general. And as we'll discuss in this video, Euripides has some things to say about his native city of Athens that are not very complimentary. As we'll also see, Euripides did not have a very successful career as a playwright in terms of winning. And remember, as we've talked about before, winning is everything with the Greeks, including in tragedy. So for Euripides to come out swinging against the Athenians with satiric or sardonic comments was not always appreciated, and the Athenians at times apparently found his plays wanting. Let us now turn to the handout content and the background on our final playwright Euripides. So first of all, his dates are given here, 485 to 406 BC. We're uncertain of the precise year 485 BC. We don't have any direct evidence for it this time, but we have some evidence to suggest that he was somewhat younger than Sophocles, so we put his dates as thereabouts. 406 BC, however, is the firm date that we have established as contemporaneous with the death of Sophocles, as we talked about in the previous video on Sophocles. Euripides actually died a few months before Sophocles, and at that time, Euripides no longer lived in Athens. He had a similar track to what Aeschylus did, where Aeschylus went off to Sicily. Euripides went up north from Athens to the sort of semi-Greek community, Macedonia, and he worked under King Archytas up there in Macedonia. He apparently spent the last couple of years up there, again, similarly to what Aeschylus did, and ended up passing away up there in 406 BC. And we have surprisingly very little other direct information about Euripides. We do have a slight delivered against him by Aeschylus, by Aristophanes, the comic playwright, one of many such rather not complimentary comments, that Euripides' mother was a greengrocer and had to go vegetable marketing in the agora in the Athenian marketplace every day. If that's true, that would have put Euripides on a very low status position, given that his mother was doing this. The story, however, does not really ring true completely because for any tragic playwright, as we've talked about before, to be able to put on tragedy really required a pretty large amount of money. And so it's likely that Euripides was fairly wealthy for, himself, and so this description of his rather low birth might simply have been a common joke passed around. It doesn't necessarily reflect accurately on his own background. But it is true that he did leave Athens and ended up in Macedon for the last couple of years of his life. We don't trust the tradition, however, that his reason for leaving had to do with his dissatisfaction with the city of Athens because they kept on giving him low prizes. I suspect that Euripides was perfectly aware that his Here we go. We just had a little bit of darkness there in the video. So that's very appropriate because Euripides wrote at a very dark time in Athenian history. So darkness is appropriate. In any event, as I was saying, we suspect that Euripides fully understood the consequences of what was going to happen if he kept on criticizing Athens time and time again. So it is probable that in reality, Euripides took the losses with good humor, and in some ways he actually does kind of partner up with Aristophanes, the comic playwright. I think in many ways, I think Aristophanes' rather negative treatment of him in his comedies is somewhat ironic, in the sense that the two of them really are actually joking with each other in order to carry out a common mission of trying to inform the city of Athens that they are making some very severe mistakes in their policy. So I think it does in fact make some sense that potentially Euripides probably considered the challenge of putting on a play to the Athenians that they would actually accept to be very much within his blood. And the losses would just have made him all the more determined to get his message across. So I rather doubt that he withdrew to Macedon in a huff over having suffered necessarily loss after loss after loss. Anyway, once again, we have a large number of plays attributed to him, and once again, we have the problem of the anthologists who come along and cut away a lot of those plays. However, we fared unusually well with Euripides because, unlike Aeschylus and Sophocles, whose collections were brought down to only 7 plays, Euripides actually does a lot better. There were 10 plays of his that were picked for survival, and then 9 more survived from the rubbish heap, as it were. So as a result, we actually have 19 plays of Euripides surviving altogether. So we did somewhat better with him than we did with Aeschylus and Sophocles. A much better output for him in that sense. And it is kind of interesting to see plays that were regarded as less successful than others, so we could see what some less well-respected plays were like. So in a way, it's almost like cheating that we were able to get those extra plays of his surviving. So Euripides competed for the first time in 455 BC, which was the year after Aeschylus' death, came in 3rd place. That's the loser position. So that's what defines the general trend of Euripides' career. He came in 3rd place fairly often. For instance, in 438 BC, this is letter E on your first page of your handout, he competed with Alcestis, the story about a wife who gives up her life for her husband, who has to find someone to die on his behalf. This is a boon that has been granted to him by the god Apollo. And because he helped Apollo out when Apollo needed to carry out a period of enslavement for a murder that he himself committed. So this guy Admetus tries to find someone to die on his behalf, and Alcestis agrees to do it as the noble chaste wife. Hercules, however, happens along by as a guest, and he's coming home from one of his labors, and he discovers that the house is in mourning. So he remedies the problem by simply running down to the underworld, catching the spirit Thanatos, the god of death, grabbing away Alcestis' ghost, and then bringing her back to the above world to be reunited with Admetus. This is a rather far-fetched idea even from the Greek standpoint, and the Athenians don't appear to have approved of it because they gave this play third place. In 431 BC came Medea, which is actually one of the most popular stories we have surviving. Medea was in fact produced by two actresses, Judith Anderson and Diana Rigg, both of whom received Tony Awards for their Broadway productions in the lead role of Medea. However, this play made the mistake of showing King Aegeus of Athens providing sanctuary for Medea, who is about to become, of course, a disastrous criminal, to Athens. Possibly for this reason, especially because this play came out right as Athens was about to start the war with Sparta, this play received third place. The fact that Medea also escapes on a dragon chariot from her grandfather, the sun, might not have sold the play very well to the Athenian audience either. Okay, so then there's Trojan Women that we also read in this class, which comes in second place, and that's because, once again, Euripides is going after the Athenians. This time it's to condemn them for a policy that they had in the Delian League of going after cities that were not cooperatively allied with them. And in this case, the Athenians went after an island that never actually was in the Delian League, Melos, because they discovered that the Melians, who were pretending to be neutral, had actually helped the Spartans on the sly during the Peloponnesian War. So the Athenians vanquished that island. And a year after the vanquishing, Euripides put on Trojan Women to show the innocent victims, the women and the children, especially, of course, the boy Astyanax, who are the ones who suffer the consequences of the Trojan War in a completely defenseless state. This, again, was not a very positive message for the Athenians to pick up, so that play came in second place. So, did Euripides ever win? Well, yes. Just a little after Medea, there was a play that did win, Hippolytus. That one featured Theseus, king of Athens, and his son Hippolytus, and Theseus' second wife Phaedra, and the relationship that sprung up between Phaedra and her stepson Hippolytus. That was at the instrumentation of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, because Hippolytus, who was a devotee of Artemis and a very skilled hunter, would not worship Aphrodite. And so the result was this love relationship that gets entangles both Phaedra and Hippolytus, and she commits suicide, Phaedra does, and writes a letter accusing Hippolytus to Theseus, who then condemns Hippolytus, exiles him, and then actually prays to his divine father Poseidon to bring about destruction against Hippolytus. That play was much more traditional in its approach, and maybe the mention of Athens in this respect, especially the invocation of Theseus, might very well have been more favorable for the Athenians. And in any event, they gave this play first place. So it was possible for Euripides to win. He actually won only 4 times altogether, though, and one of those wins was the other play you're reading, Bacchae, the assault of the god Dionysus against his native city of Thebes. It's very good that we see Dionysus bringing Thebes down. That's always a good thing for Euripides to do, for Athenians to see. They like it when Thebes looks bad, obviously. And so that may have been one of the reasons why that play won first place. Also, of course, the presentation of Dionysus is just simply awesome in that play. And it's, again, somewhat more traditional to have Dionysus included as a character. So the whole point about Euripides' tragedies is they have a tendency to turn tragic stories upside down. So as you'll see with Electra, Electra has the main character married, ironically because her name actually means lacking a marriage bed. She's supposed to be a perpetually unmarried woman. Euripides just tears right through that and has her married to a peasant, of all people, as you'll see. And Euripides actually has Oedipus and Jocasta the incestuous couple that you saw in Sophocles' play, actually ruling Thebes together. That's a play called Phoenician Women, also on your list on page 1, that was defeated in 409 BC. Sophocles actually beat that play. So Euripides just turned things around. Medea is supposed to be a witch, but when you read the play, you'll discover that Medea is really a lot more lifelike. She's more like a scorned woman than an angry witch in many ways. She doesn't actually do very much with magic or sorcery in that particular play. So her human side is brought out a great deal more than her more mythical depiction as a sorcerer. And there's quite a few other examples that you can see on the handout. So what Euripides is essentially doing is exploring a lot more of the psychology behind the stories, and again, experimenting with the stories to show other sides of them. So it's kind of like a fan fiction type of thing. And we're in darkness again. As we say, darkness is superb for Euripides because this is such a dark time of Athens. So Medea is a very pitiful character, even as she's demonic. Phaedra understands perfectly well that she is under the delusional state of imposed upon her by Aphrodite, and yet nonetheless she still carries out her delusion anyway. We see these very formal speeches that are given, probably a takeoff from the intellectual climate of the time, because the Athenians were often taught particular intellectual skills by these people, sophists, who would go around. We spoke about them before, and you read about them in the World of Athens book. Sophists would go around as paid instructors, basically, teaching all sorts of random stuff to people, including especially the art of rhetoric. There was one in particular, Gorgias, Gorgias, of Leontini from Sicily, who taught rhetorical skill. And when one investigates Euripides' use of rhetoric closely, you see influences from Gorgias, and these long speeches frequently make these plays look more like formal debates, almost like a debate team, rather than real arguments or any other kind of conversation. So that type of thing happens. As we said, Euripides is innovative. Apparently the story of Medea killing her children is possibly invented by him. We do not have any previous description of that part of the story from any other literature predating these tragedies. And also, the trial that Orestes is going to have to undergo is kept at Argos. Euripides completely dismisses the idea that it went to Athens, and that Athens was in some way ennobled by having the trial there. So once again, Euripides might have been giving Athens a bit of a rub at that point, saying, no, you actually cannot have credit for that particular trial. So once again, the big thing with Euripides is, maybe for this reason, he may not have been able to win very often. Euripides is going to rework the tragedies. And it's evident, as we'll see in more detail when we read our plays, that he's making social commentary and sometimes political commentary to the Athenians. It's far less direct than what happens with Aristophanes in the comic plays, but still it's clear that Euripides has something to say to the Athenians and wants to establish his point of view to warn the Athenians that there's something that they're doing that it really isn't a good idea. So Euripides, therefore, is the writer with the low style. Low style is a step lower than Sophocles, who had the middle style. That one was humans as they ought to be. Euripides is much more pungent. This is humans as they really are. Human nature with all of its imperfections and mistakes, and there is very little, therefore, that is redeeming in the tragedy when Euripides tells it. In his case, it's pretty much that the humans have screwed up, and there's completely nothing that can be done about it. They've made their own mistakes, and we simply have to expect that human nature will repeat those kinds of mistakes over and over again. So it's a much more pragmatic and very blunt commentary on human nature than you get with either Aeschylus or Sophocles, both of whom attempt to try to elevate the tragedy to the point of being more like educational. Euripides is clearly not interested in that. He has something entirely different in mind, and as we've talked about, it was not necessarily to the popular taste all that much of the Euripidean audience. So the plays we're reading, Electra is once again a takeoff on the same story as Sophocles' Electra and Aeschylus's Libation Bearers, the Coryphoroi. Once again, a different point of view about how Electra and Orestes have to carry out the murder of their mother as vengeance against the murder of their father. So we have Electra again. It's in this one that you will see Electra now debased to the position of a peasant. And that's actually the theme that you'll see a lot with Euripides, is the debasement of different human figures. Trojan Women is the commentary on war, the fact that when men get all done fighting their really great, glorious wars, it's frequently women and sometimes even children who suffer the tragic consequences in a completely defenseless state. So Trojan Women is a commentary on how the Greeks' war at Troy really wasn't so glorious as they might have wanted to think when you consider what happened to women such as Hecuba and Andromache and Cassandra and many of the other women who, many of whom are nameless to us now, who suffered dreadful consequences from the loss of that city. Bacchae is the kick-ass god Dionysus, who is absolutely drumming his way for vengeance against Thebes because his aunts and other members of his family all talked dirt about his mother Semele. The story is that she was convinced by her husband Zeus, convinced about his husband Zeus, that she should actually get him to show his true form to her. Her sisters, who were very jealous of her, convinced her to force Zeus into an oath to disclose that true form of his. Of course, Zeus tried to get her not to do that, but she insisted, and Zeus finally disclosed his true form, which was, of course, a fireball, and it consumed Semele in a ball of fire. So that's how Zeus ends up giving birth to, out of the thigh of the great god, Dionysus as the baby. And so Zeus ends up becoming the father of Dionysus in a very unusual way. Well, the story that all the aunts of Dionysus pass around is, oh, no. Semele actually was sleeping with a prostitute. This is not a good thing to say about a god. And the city of Thebes in general rejects Dionysic worship, especially his cousin Pentheus, the current king, whose name, ironically, in Greek means suffering. And boy, does he suffer, as you will see in the play. So that's Bacchae. And then Medea, finally, is the vengeful acts of Medea against her husband Jason, who abandons her for a much prettier, more beautiful, and better connected princess in Corinth. Medea is going to take out her feelings of vengeance with an act of vengeance against her own two children with Jason, and also against the princess and her father, incidentally, too. So these are the 4 plays that we'll be reading. When we come back to the next video, we will start discussing the history of Athens in the Peloponnesian War against Sparta. As we've indicated, the glory of Athens from earlier in the 5th century BC is going to fall apart in these 30 years. And again, this really is a tragic period in Greek history because not only did the Athenians themselves suffer terrible losses for their prior acts of political imperialism that would ultimately cost them high reputation, but in addition to that, the rest of Greece, although they were unaware of it at the time, also suffered for no longer having Athens as powerful as she was. That was very hard to foresee, but that's in fact what would turn out to be the case in years long after the deaths of all 3 of our tragic playwrights. So come on back, and we will start in with the history of the Peloponnesian War.